Hello again and welcome to part 8 of making an antique gumball machine in Blender. Now, hopefully today is the last part. We've been averaging about 30 minutes per episode, so I have 30 minutes to finish this up. What we need to do today is basically put a surface down for the gumball machine to be sitting on, a wall in the background, and then set up the materials for cycles. Like I said, I don't really like the way that Eevee does glass and things, and I'm just more comfortable in cycles in general. But if you want to play with Eevee, I mean, we've already set up the textures for the most part, and, you know, it does look really good. I don't know what's going on with the glass, but like I said, I'm not a huge fan of Eevee, so for previewing, I love it. This looks fantastic. But for final renders, I still prefer an actual rendering engine. But before we get started on that, I want to share with you a website. Now, not a sponsor. I do not work for them. They're not a sponsor of this video. However, if you've watched other YouTubers, sorry to call out Blender Guru again, but he always pushes his Polygon, which is a site he owns, and that makes sense. But it's a great site, but you have to pay for materials. And the thing I like about this website, I just found this on Google one day, is that there's 716 public domain physically based rendering textures. And I'm just sharing it with you because I use it myself and I don't want to have to pay for things. So the first thing I did is I looked up wood, and I think I picked this one, maybe. I don't know. I picked one of these. Doesn't really matter which. And then I also looked up wall, and I think I went with this one. So you can just click here to download JPEGs in any size. So I've in my texture folder for our project, I've already downloaded and extracted those. So we have normal maps, we have displacement maps, we have color maps, we have ambient occlusion maps, and we have roughness maps. So what we can do is just go and create a couple surfaces for those in Blender really quickly, just so we have something for our gumball machine to stand on. So I'm going to use Shift-C to put my cursor at the center of the scene. And one other thing that I want to do real quick is just kind of tidy up our hierarchy. So pretty much everything should become a child of the base. So I select A to get everything. And then I'm going to make sure that the base is the last thing selected, so it's highlighted a little bit brighter in its outline. Hit Control P and say Keep Transform. And so now if we pick up the base, we can move the entire gumball machine at once. So in top view, Shift C to put the cursor at the center of the origin of the scene. And we can actually go into layout at this point. And I'm going to hit Shift A, add a plane. I'm just going to scale it up. Actually, I'm going to go into edit mode and scale it up. Probably like that. Scale it pretty wide on X. I'll take the front of it, bring it forwards a lot. And then I'll just take this back edge and then bring it up so that we have like a back wall. And then let's create some materials for these and unwrap them and set them up super straightforwards. So what we'll do is we'll go into face mode, choose this bottom face. Why can't I? Oh, because I have X-ray on. Is that why? There we go. And we'll go into our materials, create a new material. We'll call this wood. And then we'll select this face. We'll create a new material and call this one wall. And the wall material, we'll make its viewport color slightly orangey because I think some of those bricks were orange colored. And we will assign that there. Maybe a little bit stronger. What is going on here? Why can't I assign this to that? What is going on? Why can't I select things? Wall. Change your color. Oh, because I'm in solid. That's why. So that can just be a little off-white. And then the wood we will just make like a brown color. Okay. So now we just have to go into shading and use those textures we have. It should be pretty simple to set up. So let's just go and do that. So I'm going to just use generated texture coordinates for now. We'll just use texture coordinates. We will get a texture image. Oops. And we'll do the wood first. So let's go into texture, planks, and we want the one that's called color. And we will take the generated, put that into the base color here. And it's way too big. So we will get a texture, or we'll get a vector mapping. And I think we can just make the scale much smaller. That works perfectly. All right. And then we'll just duplicate this texture image, use the same vector, but now we will open up the normal map. For this, we will choose non-color data. And we will use normal, or normal map, I guess. All right. So maybe a little bit less strong. Not 5, 0.5. And then now we want to use our roughness map. And for this, we will pick roughness, and we will put that into the roughness slot. And it looks like it's inverted. This should also be non-color. So let's get a invert. Let's just check with node wrangler. Node wrangler. I don't know why I always say it backwards. Okay, so where it's white is where it should be maximum roughness, right? Because that would be like that. So that looks like that's working because the cracks should not be rough, right? But it overall looks like it's too smooth everywhere. So I will just go in here and create a color ramp. And this way I can create more like white areas to make everything more rough. And maybe even just tone down never make it fully shiny, and just kind of play with those values a little bit. Because it looks like it's wet in all the areas where it's like actually shiny right now. I don't want it to look like wet wood. I just want it to look less rough where it's dark, but not completely. So I like that. I might even just put a brightness and contrast on the color of the wood. Let's see how this looks. So let's bring a little bit more contrast. Actually, well, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I don't like that. I just want does Blender have something like that? I'm not going to worry about it. This looks good enough. We're just trying to beast mode through this. Okay, so we're already at 10 minutes, and I still have to get cycles and lighting set up. So I don't think we need any other maps for this. What else was there? There was ambient occlusion. Don't really care about. Actually, we'll use ambient occlusion. We're not going to use displacement, and we don't really care about the metallic map. It's just not a metallic material. But what we will do, I actually think would be nice, is just blend the AO into the actual color, and I think that might do what I'm trying to accomplish. So let's get the mix RGB and put that into there. Let's look at this. So factor 100%, but instead of mix, We'll choose like darken or something. So should I switch these? Oh, we also need to do that. Yes, there we go. So now it's a little bit darker where the AO doesn't get to the boards. So that's pretty much what I was looking for. Okay, so now what I can do is I'm just going to select everything here, hit copy a couple times, then go to our wall material, just delete what's here by default. Why is this being a pain? Okay, so now it looks like the UVs for this are not working correctly for some reason. Can we use generated? No? Okay, well, let's just unwrap project from view bounds and just use UV for that. Okay, that works fine. Okay, so now what we're just going to do is load all those same things except for the bricks. So we'll do bricks AO. We'll do bricks color. We'll do bricks roughness. And then we'll do bricks normal map. Why is this struggling so much? This should be wood. Okay, this one's wall. We want to make these bricks smaller. Maybe not that big. Let's try 0.5. Something like that looks good enough. I don't like how these bricks at the bottom double up like that. Can we move? There we go. Or actually, okay, that works. Oh, I guess we want to. Okay. I just didn't like that one part of the texture where those three bricks were like on top of each other. It looked a little bit weird. All right, so how does this texture look? So here's our color. I feel like we're not getting enough pop with this. Let's try. I guess we just can't see it that much. It's probably just because our roughness is just really weird. That works for me. Okay. So let's add a camera and kind of set up the scene. So I'm going to just go into layout mode now, go to front view, shift A, add a camera. Now this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. I always hear people say, okay, hit Control 0 to go on the camera and then grab Z and move it around. And I have a much better way, especially if you're a gamer, if you've ever played any computer game in the past 20 years. So when you're in object mode, select your camera, hit Control 0 on the numpad to go in the view of the camera, but then hit Shift tilde. Tilde is the key on the top left of your keyboard below Escape, to the left of your 1 key, right above Tab. And now you can fly with WASD like you would in a video game. So I'm using W to go forwards, S to go backwards, A and D to go left and right, and my mouse to look. And then I can hold Shift to go faster. And I find this is the easiest way to position a camera because it's just natural if you've ever played anything 3D before. So I'll just get a nice little angle on this gumball machine. let's go into Look Dev. I actually need to move this over and possibly extend it so that it fills the frame. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to change the aspect ratio of my camera, because why not? It does not need to be full HD. It doesn't have to be like that. So let's make, I guess we could do 1080 by 1080. And then now I can choose my camera, shift tilde, and just fly in and get a tighter shot. Okay, awesome. And then in our viewport settings, I'm going to turn off relationship lines, because all of these lines that you see right here are because these gumballs are parented to the gumball machine, and those are called relationship lines. And if you turn it off, it just looks better, just like that. So now we have our camera set up. I don't want these bricks to be too bright, so I'm actually going to go into that material and just turn that down. So for our bricks color, it's a little bit too bright for my liking. Let's start with a hue saturation value, because that's a little bit easier to control than... oh, we're in the wrong one. We're in wood. Let's go to the wall. It's a little bit easier to control that. So let's do hue saturation. We're already halfway through and I haven't even got the light set up. Yikes. Okay, let's turn the value down a bit. And that looks actually really good. So now I think that the normal map is way too strong. And the roughness should go up a bit. So now I probably want to go even darker. Whoops. There we go. All right, and then now I feel like the wood is probably also too bright, so I'm going to do the same thing there. I'm going to just bring the value down on that a bit. Maybe even the saturation a bit. Because I really want the background to be not the focus, and then just have the gumball machine look interesting. So let's go in and add a area light. And I'm going to use R twice, which goes to trackball mode, and just kind of use it to point at the gumball machine. All right, I think that's good. Make it bigger, a little bit stronger maybe. All right, and then we will add some local point lights. One kind of off to the side. And I'm going to take these lights, the camera, and move that all into a new collection called Lights and Camera. All right, so that's good enough for now. One thing I want to do is just put a couple gumballs in the tray. So before I forget that, let's just go into Look Dev, hide this, grab a couple of these, duplicate, and we'll just manually place them in there. I don't care about using physics for this, so. All right, we can see a couple of them. Let's, I'll duplicate one more. Hopefully we get a better color. Nope, we got pink again. Well, whatever. Just so we can see them in the camera. So for our background, we'll use an environment texture, and I have this folder called Archive where I just downloaded a bunch of these. I don't know why I have this stuff in there. Something's reusing my same folder where I have a bunch of these. So I think I went with this one. It's just a generic one, but it, you know, doesn't look terrible. All right, so let's, we're at 21 minutes. Let's see what this looks like in cycles. This floor now is bothering me. It almost looks like the normal map is inversed. Like the areas where it's supposed to be lower are, maybe this should be -1. Can I do negative more than that? Like that makes it look like these are raised up. That's, I'm gonna try that, but it just doesn't look right overall. Let's try bringing this down just a bit now. See, why is it like so washed out? It's a little bit unnerving how washed out it looks, but let's give this a quick render and see what it looks like. So we're running out of time here. So I think what I want to do is go to cycles, but because I'm recording, I'm not going to use GPU rendering because that will, I think, interfere with the video that I'm recording. Sorry, I'm getting kind of scatterbrained because I'm thinking about a lot of things here. So let's turn this on, and I want to go into camera settings, viewport display. I always forget where this is. Is it in... right. So black out that area so we don't have to see it. So yeah, the glass already looks, you know, way better just in cycles. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with EV, but I'm not going to worry about it too hard. Let's increase our samples. And I want to turn off overlays. Okay, I decided to turn off the one of the point lights because it was kind of killing the shadow, and I liked having that shadow there. But I might try changing some settings on this point light. So yeah, when it's a small point light, you have a very hard shadow. So I want to make my shadow a little bit more kind of impressive on the wall. And now I want to zoom in and focus just on the glass to make sure that I have this part right. So let's go to our gumball machine and choose our glass and look at its material. So I was trying to tweak this material for cycles, so let's see what I can do for Eevee. So you don't really need alpha on glass when it's being properly rendered from cycles. So I had to have that alpha on there because I don't know, like I said, not a huge fan of how Eevee does things. So now I think this looks a lot better because it actually looks like glass, which is what it's supposed to look like. So I'm happy with that now. So one trick I use is Control B to put a border render, which is really nice because then you can focus on just parts of your render. Like for example, I want to work on just the base of this gumball machine now. I feel like the red should be a little bit richer. I made it a little bit too desaturated. So let's go bump up the richness on that. Maybe still darker, but also richer. And it only has to re-render this part. And then you can hit Control-Alt-B to clear that, and then it goes back to rendering your whole scene again. So I like that shadow. I think I'm ready to do a full-size render. So I'm going to pause this video, hit render, and then it'll be magic to you, but we'll be back when I have a render. Alright, so I just did a render, but before I show you that, I noticed that there were some mistakes in my render. One thing was that this is a difference between Eevee and cycles. This material doesn't work in cycles. If we switch back to Eevee, apparently it doesn't work there either. Why was it working before? Well, somehow, I guess it was just, I never looked that close, but it looks horrible in cycles. So we have to fix that. Why can't I? There we go. And so it's probably because I'm using a single point for the color, and the bump map is turned down so much at this point. I'm actually just going to create a separate material for the crank so we can change it later. So I'm just going to hit duplicate for this material and call it crank. And then that way now we can change it and we won't be affecting the other material. So I assume that this should go up. That's part of the reason why we lost detail, because that used to be higher, but it was messing with the faceplate, so I lowered it. But what we will do is we'll just go in and adjust those UVs in the UV editor. Let's go into solid. Why can't I? Oh, I turned off my my viewport gizmo things. So let's I'm going to apply my mirror modifier, select this, and we'll do the same thing with seams. So this episode's going to be a little bit longer now because I have to go in and change some things, but let's isolate this. the wrong one. Why is this so? Okay, that's annoying. Don't select this thing, just select this. Isolate just that. There we go. So let's, with those, mark seam, then unwrap, and that will kind of create better textures for us. Let's get our image, and even though we're just going to use nonsense for it, let's just line these up. These can overlap, it's fine in this case. I really should just prepare like a separate texture in Photoshop, but this is just an example of, you know, how far you can get with, actually I don't want to scale that down, with very little effort. So let's scale everything down, and I'm just going to rotate it 180 and just kind of like stick it right there. So now we have some more interesting surface texture other than just nothing at all. All right, let's try rendering that again. And now if we turn on or turn off our viewport stuff, that looks good. I mean, you know, there's like some interesting details there. It could be because scuff marks, whatever. But now at least that has a surface that makes sense. And I can probably go down and make this 0.1 again or whatever it was. Okay, so we fixed that problem. But there was another problem. I don't like... Well, I'm going to pause and try to fix it, and then I'll tell you about it. All right, so I have been busy in the meantime since I paused recording. This was the very first render that I had done in Cycles, and I wasn't happy with it. The first thing that stood out to me was the glass looked super thick, and that was because of the index of refraction. So if we look at our glass material, there are index of refraction settings, and I ultimately landed on 1.2, but I think default is 1.35 or 1.4, but I had to play around with it because when we were doing an Eevee, the defaults looked really weird, so I was trying different values. I think I was down to like 0.9 or something, 0.95 maybe, and it looked really wrong. And I had to do another render to fix that, and like I pointed out just a few minutes ago, that the material for here wasn't looking correct. It looked better in Eevee, but because materials were changed and stuff, that was broken. So I did another render in slot 2. And, another mistake too was this looked very sharp right here, and I was curious why. And if you remember on this faceplate, we have a subdivision surface modifier. And what happened was this was unchecked, and this is render. And because I was temporarily turning it off for demonstration purposes, I probably clicked this and accidentally clicked this as well. So that was turned off, so in our render, there was no subdivision surface being applied to this. So I did another render, and you can see a lot of things changed between render slot 1 and slot 2. I changed the index of refraction, so now it looks a little bit thinner, but it almost looks completely transparent in front. You're not getting any reflections. So that was wrong. I also decided to make this back wall a bit brighter, so I brought that up. I made the floor a bit darker, and also I didn't like how these cracks were kind of too light, so I played with the roughness settings for the floor until I got something I was happy with. And so I made the floor darker, I made those cracks a little bit darker, brought up the wall value, but I was still unhappy with a couple things. I felt like this looked too flat. I felt like the red color was still too washed out, and of course the index of refraction was messed up. So on render slot 3, by the way, I've been using this slot feature recently. I never really used that before, but what's cool is you can go to an empty slot and it'll just show a blank image. But if I were to hit render right now and do another image, it would render into slot 7, so I can easily compare it to my previous slots. So here we have slot 2, and then I went into slot 3, and I think I did the default 1.4, 1.45 or whatever it was for glass, and this looked a little bit too extreme for my tastes. I also thought the red was too bright, so I brought it down, but now it started looking too washed out, and I still couldn't figure out what was going on there. But I did improve this metal a bit. I made it a little bit more reflective, a little bit less rough, which kind of brought out the depth and color on that. And I think that's all I changed was the color and the index of refraction. Still wasn't happy. So now in slot 4, I tried playing with the refraction again. I was getting a lot closer to what I wanted. I tried playing with the red color again, but things still weren't playing quite nicely. So by render slot 5, I think I had it figured out. And the problem was, if you remember, we originally had 2 point lights in the scene, and I disabled this one with the eye icon. But I forgot that when you render, even if it's disabled in the viewport, it'll still show in the render. So I went in, I turned it off in viewports and in render. So this light is completely disabled. Now, I could have deleted this light because I don't want it anymore, but I left it in here and hid it in render so that I could show you that we had this light and it was still there. So what was happening is, in the previous render, there was a light over here, and it was really making this red look too bright and too washed out, and just affecting the scene in a way that it didn't look like when I had it rendered in the viewport. So I turned off that light, and now my shadows came back. This side looks dark like I kind of wanted it to. And the index of refraction was now looking kind of like what I wanted. The only thing I felt like was the area light was a little bit too big. And I noticed that the edge, or the bottom edge of the Gumball Machine didn't really have a shadow, and it should. And I realized that's because the floor was clipping through the bottom of the Gumball Machine. The bottom of the Gumball Machine wasn't perfectly flat at the bottom of the scene. So I moved it down, and now you have that nice little shadow where the bottom of the Gumball Machine is. And here is our final render. I also put on depth of field. I don't know if it's very noticeable. You can see, these edges kind of get a little bit more blurry. But since we don't have a huge amount of depth in our scene, the depth of field didn't apply too much. But it did apply enough that I was happy with it. So I just moved that down, and I have that shadow. So that took, the past hour or whatever of just tinkering with the settings. But that's kind of how it goes. So I finally landed on a red color that's rich, dark, not too saturated. That's kind of the opposite of rich, but you know what I mean. I found a balance between desaturated and completely saturated, where it looks like a strong color, but it isn't overwhelming, and it's kind of nice and dark. I changed the size of the noise because I felt in the final render it wasn't really big enough. You couldn't see it that much. And yeah, I ended up getting rid of that unnecessary light and just... I went through that revision process. So from the first render, which was this, which looks toyish, to this one, I feel like we've made major improvements, especially when you look at them back to back. And to step through that process again, we went from here to here. Still couldn't get the color or the refraction right. The default refraction looked a little bit too weird. Colors were still off. Got the refraction dialed in a bit better, but the colors were still too bright. Figured out I had a light that I didn't need, and then figured out that the floor was clipping through the bottom. So I think that's going to do it. I'm happy with this render for now. For this tutorial series, this video has already gone on a little bit too long, but this is the final video, so I didn't want to have to do another video just trying to perfect the render. Knowing me, I could honestly spend like another day perfecting this. If this was a personal project, I would spend a lot more time trying to make it perfect, but unfortunately I can't do that for a tutorial because I'd have to show all that and explain all the different changes I made, and it's a little bit beyond the scope. However, for my very first Blender tutorial, I am happy with the results. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, and of course you were here to witness them. I also fixed them as I went, because part of the process of 3D modeling is fixing up the mistakes you make, and that happens to absolutely everyone. There's no escaping that. But, you just work with what you got and keep trying, and eventually you'll get somewhere that you're happy. I hope that you learned something from this tutorial series. I hope that you were able to follow it. Hopefully the mistakes that I made weren't too confusing. I feel like maybe a couple of them were. But at this point, I'm happy to have this tutorial series out, ready for you guys to consume. I have a lot more ideas that I want to do for tutorials, maybe not one as ambitious as this one for the next one. I actually have a tutorial I might be able to do in 1 or 2 parts. I'm always looking out for more people to help on the internet, so I'd like to do more videos of helping people on the internet. But there's one more thing I'd like to show you before I wrap this up, and like I mentioned, I have actually done this gumball machine twice now, because before I decided to do this tutorial, I wanted to A, make sure that I could make the gumball machine, and B, make sure that it could look reasonably good. And like I said, I'm still new with Eevee, so trying to figure out the settings for Eevee, I'm not that great at, but let me show you what I had before. So this was my previous project, and this is in Eevee, and I'm actually really happy with how this one came out. I mean, it looks almost the same. I forgot to do this piece up here, but I figured, I'll just do that in the actual tutorial. I did make a custom bottom piece, which this is how it would actually look on a real gumball machine, but for ours, I just, I knew it was going to be sitting on a table, so we didn't, worry about that. But, it's not like it's hard to make a circle. This was also done by eyesight, by hand. So, the coin mechanism, if we put these side by side real quick, here is what we have today. And here is what, can I still do this? Yeah. We had what I did before I even started recording for this tutorial, and it looks pretty similar. There are some differences. One difference is, this mechanism I did by eyesight, just like I did the one that we saw. So it ended up a little bit skinnier here, a little bit smaller here. I forgot to apply the mirror modifier, so I have this seam on this one, which we don't have on this one, so this looks a little bit better. One thing that I kind of wish I had done differently on our tutorial is I made this mouth a little bit shorter. This one's a little bit taller, not too much taller, but maybe it could have gone down to about there, like a 1/4 inch shorter. I would have been a little bit happier with it because, this is a pretty tall one. This one, pretty tall. This one's a lot shorter. But I think even this one is shorter than what we ended up with. But overall, I'm happy with what I was able to do on video for you guys. But otherwise, everything else mostly came out the same. Maybe this bottom part is a little bit taller, but I actually kind of like the taller version. This piece came out pretty much the same. But this is in Eevee, and I actually like the way the glass came out in Eevee here. I couldn't figure out how to get that same look in this project file, and I even had the same exact settings. So I'm not sure what I did wrong in this time around, because this has weird errors. Like, you're getting these weird artifacting lines, which I don't really know how to get rid of yet in Eevee. But it doesn't have that obnoxious, everything is being obstructed by reflections, where if you rotate it this way, you just have a massive glare. You can see the gumballs in here from all angles. But otherwise, I made 2 of the same object, both times completely by eyesight. I wasn't using exact measurements. And other than this being a little bit too tall, and this being a little bit skinnier, I'm really happy with how both came out. They both came out pretty similar, and I think that's pretty cool for having just done this off the top of my head, just looking at the picture, not using precise measurements and stuff. And so if you decide to do this tutorial, you'll probably end up somewhere in the ballpark between this one and this one. You'll kind of have your own unique machine, but that's okay, because a lot of these antiques, they all kind of were a little bit different, a little bit handmade, a little bit not as precisely manufactured as something we'd see today. Obviously, there'd be competitors copying off each other trying to make the same design, like we saw here. Like this one and this one are two different machines. This faceplate is completely different. The structure, like these are thin and these ones are thick and wide. I mean, there's going to be variance, so whatever you end up doing, hopefully you follow this tutorial and do something cool. Whatever you end up doing, you'll probably come up with your own variation of this. But yeah, so this is what I had done previously, and obviously you saw here what we accomplished today, and I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm going to wrap it up now. Thanks for watching. Please tell me if you do this render. I would love to see this. You can just comment on this video with a link to your render. I think you can email me. If not, my website is gmiller.net. So if you go to gmiller.net, you can go to contact and you can send me an email. You can click this for Facebook Messenger or whatever, or send me an email here. And I would love to see what you guys render. I'm absolutely super excited to see that and look forward to that. That'd make me really happy to know that somebody actually followed this and did something cool with it. So let me know. But this is me signing off. I will have another tutorial coming up in the next few weeks because like I said, I have ideas. So stay tuned for that. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you want to see my next tutorial. Please give me feedback. This is my very first ever full tutorial series, and I know it was a little bit rough around the edges, but I had fun and I look forward to doing another one. So let me know your feedback and let me know your questions, comments, all that stuff, and have fun blendering.